Joining me today are two of Canada's best known and most respected food and drink writers. Lucy Waverman is the author of 8 cookbooks. She's the food editor of the LCBO's Food and Drink magazine, and she's a weekly columnist for the Globe and Mail newspaper. Beppy Crisarial has been the Globe and Mail's wine and spirits columnist for 12 years now. His recommendations frequently cause stockouts at liquor stores across the country, such as his following. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right. Good. All right. Well, let's dive right into the reason you're here. I've got your book. Do you have a copy of your new book that you've co-authored?
Right.
Excellent. All right. The Flavour Principle. So congratulations on this. And let's dive in. Why don't you tell me about how you came up with the idea for the book, the seminal idea, where you were and what you were talking about?
Shall I start?
Yeah.
As I remember it, although the evening was very foggy for me because I think I'd had a little more to drink than Lucy. It was at driving home from Lucy's house. Lucy was driving, thankfully, and on that short drive, we're always talking about our favorite chefs and what other cookbooks we've recently purchased and looked through, what restaurants we've been to. And we thought, boy, didn't she make a wonderful dish? And wasn't that pairing the Sangiovese with that veal chop and the earthy mushrooms, porcini mushrooms, great? What made it great? And should we be doing a book? And what should we be doing a book about? And there seemed to be this intersection. We thought about it, and we thought, well, what makes a dish what it is, besides all the different processes in particular that might be going on in the recipe? And there's usually one overarching, it seems simple to us now, but and probably simple to everyone, but there's usually one overarching element in a dish that really kind of defines it, and we thought of those central flavors, or at least flavors that came to our minds, not just bitter, salty, sour, and sweet, but things like nutty, things like tart, things like creamy, even umami. And we saw that as a
jumping off point, I guess.
Yeah, and that kind of connection with the world of beverages, whether it's beers or wines or cocktails. And we thought that would be the great pivot, because I tend to think about pairing, beverages with food in that sense. I think, I kind of start with, if it's an earthy dish, well, will an earthy drink pair with it, or will, in fact, something that's not earthy pair well with it as a contrast.
Okay. And Lucy, in your experience, having written cookbooks before, and even pairing books, what is it about this one that makes it different from what you see out there, whether it's other cookbooks or other food and drink pairing books?
Well, first of all, we take a global attitude towards food. This book is globally influenced. It has food from many different countries, although all the products are locally, you can buy everything locally. And so that was the first thing. It was to try to think of food in a more expansive way. Secondly, looking at flavors, for me, I go out and I eat something and I say, oh my God, that was the best taste that I've had forever. Taste and flavor, of course, are related, right? And so we wanted to produce recipes that had that kind of flavor in them. And when we started to think about it, we were able to winnow it down to 11 flavors in food. I mean, yes, there's more, but these are the ones that we thought were very important. And then I started to develop recipes around the flavors. To give you an example, creamy. People think of creamy as having, got to have butter in it, got to have cream in it, whatever. Not true, because when you think about creaminess, it's a texture as well as a taste. And risotto is creamy, and there's no cream in risotto. Or with sweet, that's another one where people think, oh, well, it must be a chapter full of desserts. Not at all, because there's so many sweet spices, like cardamom, cinnamon, star anise, things like that you can mix together, and you can produce food that has a sweet flavor, but it's a sweet, spicy flavor, not necessarily sweet, sugary flavor, right?
Right, exactly. And then, Beppy, to you, while we're on that, with the creamy risotto and then the sweet spices, what would be the wine pairings or drink pairings, more broadly, that you'd put with those dishes?
Often I think about it in two ways, and I think the reason to focus on the flavors is because it's you can get really geeky with food and wine pairings and think, wow, there's 14 different things happening in that dish. I'm panicking here. What must I, what could I possibly come up with that would pair with all of that? I think the idea is to sort of do that Occam's razor and to just leave all the extraneous stuff aside and think about it in one way. And with something like you mentioned, was it sweet spices?
Yeah.
I adore. In fact, I think one of the most beautiful pairings of all is not something that's traditional, and that is with some of the more Indian-inspired dishes, whether it's curries that aren't necessarily hot spice, but sweet spice. I love things like, and I think you do too, Natalie. Things that are very aromatic, like white wines from Alsace, like the Rieslings, the Gewürztraminers. Even Viognier is a killer with Indian-inspired curries, and so that's a bit of a contrast rather than a complement. You're using something that's a little bit maybe opposite.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then back to the creamy risotto. What would you put with that, Beppy?
In that sense, I think of it in terms of one of the other main things I think about, and I think many sommeliers and wine experts think about when they're pairing, is also weight. If it's a light dish, pair it with something lighter in body. And when I think of creamy, I tend to think of creamy wines because you want to really match that texture. And with creamy risotto, I love things like Chardonnays. They can even be oaky Chardonnays. They can be the more delicate, lighter styles of Chardonnay from, say, Burgundy, or even from here in Ontario, or even from the Okanagan, the North Okanagan, or around the Kelowna region, where they have these brisk temperatures that produce these really nice, tense Chardonnays. So, but always with a bit of creaminess underpinning it.
Mm-hmm, that's great. And Lucy, was there a pairing that really surprised you that worked? You didn't think it was going to work, but it was brilliant?
Well, there were several, but the thing that I found fascinating was Beppy's insistence of not drinking red wine with cheese.
Ah.
And
is this a point of contention?
It may be.
It was. We had the gloves off for a while.
Yes, and we had always drunk red wine with cheese. We had always felt that it was a great way to carry over the wines that we had with the main course. And Beppy said to me, "Oh, absolutely not. You want to try white wines with cheese." So reluctantly, we did, and we found that white wines with cheese just brought out a cheese flavor that the red wines masked, that there was a lightness to the wines, to the cheese. It was fun. And with the heavier red wines that we were drinking with cheese, we weren't tasting the cheese.
Oh.
And we got hooked on it. And now that's all we serve with cheese is white wine, and that was Beppy.
Oh, happy ending, at least.
This goes back. We have a bit of history even before the book. We were once on a cruise, a Globe and Mail cruise, and we were doing a demonstration. And I wanted to raise this point with an audience of people who are, well steeped in food. And it's funny. I know. I don't win a lot of friends when I say that red wine and cheese kind of war it with each other. But we did this presentation with a lot of your food, and then we had some cheese, and we asked the audience, what do you think of this dry red wine with the cheese? And most people said, yeah, it goes really well together. But I had snuck in a sweet wine into the tasting. I said, okay, well, now try that salty cheese with the sweet wine. And everybody's kind of going, a white dessert wine with cheese? You're crazy, And I think I converted maybe half the room. The other half still wasn't sure. So, but I know, Natalie, you must be familiar with the University of Davis, California Davis study, the big wine school that kind of had all these trained tasters. Yes. A while back, and it proved, much to the dismay of a lot of people who love red wine and cheese, that cheeses tend to mess with the flavor, the nuances of a red wine.
Yeah, they're tough. They're so mouth coating. There's so much going on. Again, it's not just the flavor, it's the weight, it's the texture, it's everything. All right, so that had a happy ending. How about a pairing? Again, back to you, Lucy. Then. That just did not work. It was a disaster. And why didn't it work?
Well, I hate to say this, but I don't think we ever had that, did we?
Oh, really?
Nothing. We didn't. I think because we had there weren't that many catastrophes in terms of I am trying to think if there was anything that was really really
What
bad.
what
Well,
about the bacon jello?
yeah. I'm a fan of playing with bacon. I like a lot of people like the flavor of bacon,
Not
and
a
I
lot like it in
a
jello.
couple of recipes. No, but I did get to work in, Natalie. I got to work in. Lucy let me put in a cocktail drink, which is bacon wash bourbon.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful,
So
right? Like where you take a bottle of bourbon and let it steep in rendered bacon fat, and then filter it out, and you get this kind of, I think, really complementary. The wonderful sweetness of bourbon and smokiness with the bacon.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's not like I was the ultimate person who made these decisions, but the bacon jello I just couldn't go for.
You
But
have to draw a line somewhere, Lucy. All right.
the bacon smoked bourbon actually was delicious.
It sounds amazing.
It
Oh, okay, well, let's wrap up this part of our conversation right now. You've shared some excellent tips. I'm sure people are going to want to really dive into the Flavor Principle, your new book, but we're going to come back and ask you some more questions about food and wine pairing, the book itself. So thank you for joining me for this part.
Thank you.
All right.